Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Empower. This is the second session block of the day. I'm Daniel Callahan. I'll be your co-host today along with Eric Mohlman, and we will be focusing on advanced formulas and functions. We'll give folks about a minute or so here to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And today is a workshop style session. So we'll be grabbing an app from our exchange, and we'll be working through 4 different exercises with Eric and I splitting 2 and 2 with you all. So now is a great time to log into your Builder account if you have one open, or if you know that you can create apps in your corporate account, that will work as well. But we've got a lot of folks out there who are not account admins and don't have app create permissions, and that's why a Builder account is a great option here. Just think of it as your personal Quickbase account, so you're the admin. A couple slides that will walk you through opening a Builder account if you don't have one, but if for the folks out there that do already have one, go ahead and sign into that. And we'll jump to the title slide here. So if you've signed up for a bunch of sessions and you've stumbled into this one, again, this will be Advanced Functions in Quickbase, and I'll be your co-host. So I'm Daniel Callahan. I'm out in Portland, Oregon, so feel free to come say hi in the chat. Let me know where you're joining in from. I ran a couple of sessions yesterday, and we had folks around the world, South Africa, Australia, Czech Republic, and all across North America as well. So happy you've all joined in today's session. Hope Empower's been pretty awesome for you so far learning things, and hopefully you'll learn some new formulas and functions today in Quickbase. And we'll go ahead and jump right into this. And this, again, this will be recorded, so you'll have access to the recording. So if you need to step away for any reason, that'll be okay. And we'll send out this deck afterwards as well, or we'll provide access to it as well. So we've got some folks from all around the States so far, a couple Portlanders as well. So that's pretty awesome to see. Not seeing anyone out of the country yet. Always like these to be international sessions, international empowers, but we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everyone. I'm Daniel Callahan. I've been at Quickbase for 6.5 years. I'm currently a product trainer, which I've been doing for about 1.5 years. So if you've taken any fundamental or intermediate live training courses that we offer every month, you've maybe been trained by me before. If you haven't, I hope to see you in the future. Prior to product trainer, I was a Quickbase developer or builder for about 3 years. So any of the apps that we run internally to run the business, I helped manage those and build those. So hoping to share any knowledge I have with you all. And Eric, you want to come say hi?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad that you're here. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to ask your questions along the way. We'll try to address those. But I guess just by way of introduction, I'm Eric. I've been with Quickbase for well over a decade in a variety of roles. I've done sales, I've done support, I've done sales engineering. Most recently, I am in the implementation side of Quickbase. So a lot of our newer customers, as they are getting started with Quickbase, helping them get as fast and successful as possible with whatever they're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. And I did see Germany and Italy pop in, so we're officially an international session. I'm sure I missed some other folks as well, so apologies, but welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started here. As I mentioned earlier about a Builder account, so if you have one, awesome, go ahead and sign into that. That way we know that you can go ahead and download the test app that we have from the exchange that we've created for this session. If you don't have one, you can head over to the URL I just posted in the chat, and then you'll come to a screen that will look something like this. You'll just want to look for that sign up button, throw in your first and last name, email address, a password, submit. You'll get a verification email that you'll want to click through pretty quickly. That way you won't run into any snags. If you don't want a builder account and you know that you can create apps on your corporate account, that's a-okay to go ahead and use that. But just want to give everyone a kind of a warning here that we are downloading an app from the exchange and you'll need those permissions to do so. If you have any issues getting a builder account up and running, just throw it in the chat and we'll keep an eye out and we'll help you out there. Next up, once you're signed into your account, whether a builder account or a corporate account, what you want to do is head over to our app exchange. So if you're on a builder account, you'll be experiencing this left-hand screenshot. You'll scroll to the bottom of the Learning and Help column, and you'll see a link that says Exchange. And if you're in your corporate account, at the top of the Learning and Help column, you'll see an Explore Sample Apps button. Regardless of your experience, go ahead and click through there. And then you'll be redirected to our exchange, which I'm going to grab the app with all of you as well. And what you can do is go ahead and just type in Empower 2021 Advanced. You can just copy paste it from the chat as well. And you'll get one app as a result here. And once you do find that app, go ahead and click Get This App. You don't have to rename it. You can if you'd like, and then hit Create App. And then you'll have the app ready for the workshop, which will be in the second half of the session here. If you're having any issues finding the app or getting it to download, please let us know, and we'll help you out there. But we'll keep moving forward, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. But this being a workshop, we want to make sure that as many people as possible can follow along and build the formulas from scratch together. So again, with this being a workshop, we do have some learning goals that we would like to share. Hopefully coming out of this session, you'll be pretty comfortable or at least have an understanding of the formulas that we'll be creating today. The first two I'll be walking you through, and then I'll pass it over to Eric and he'll do the last two. But the first learning goal is adding a parent record thumbnail to a child form. So if you have a table with images, what you may want to do is pass a thumbnail that image to a child record to get it on the form to be used for a multitude of reasons, whether it's for notifications, or you're using that child table in a many-to-many, and you want the images to be in an embedded report in another parent. Secondly, we'll be looking at how to extract a date and time from a logged entry field. And this learning goal or this exercise won't be limited to date and time. That's all we'll be covering. But as you learn how to extract the date and time in our example, it should give you an idea of how you can extract other values from logged entry fields that you're using. And if you're not familiar with a logged entry field, once we jump into the app together, I'll review that before we actually jump into the formulas. Eric will then be walking you through summarizing and converting email addresses to users. So with that keyword summarizing, that means we're bringing user values from a child up to a parent, which you may have for a number of use cases. One example of that would be if you're using an app for employee lifecycle management and you have a bunch of checklist items for folks around the org from HR and IT, they may be assigned a specific item or task. And what you want to do is summarize all of those different users from those checklist items up to a parent, so that then you can send out a notification or leverage the list user field for permissions or any other kind of situation there. Lastly, we'll be looking at how we can automate changing a user's role in an app with a little bit of help from formulas and a little bit of help from pipelines. So with those 4 learning goals in mind, we'll go ahead and jump into the agenda for today. So we're going to put ourselves in the shoes of a builder for a local company out in Utah. And we're going to be solving the use case for them as we work through these different exercises. We'll do that via the workshop. We have an extra slide for you that we'll send out or we'll try to include in this PowerPoint after the session. And then as Eric mentioned, we should have a decent chunk of time at the end, hopefully 10 or 15 minutes to do a Q&A. So let's go ahead and jump right into the story and use case here. And Eric, you can correct me if I mispronounce this, because he's the Utah local there, but we will be putting ourselves in the shoes as a builder for Timpanogos Adventures. They are an outdoor equipment rental company out in Lillard, Utah. And they've been tasked to do or to kind of execute on several improvements in the app. The first one is they have a table full of products, and we have images in that table, right? So we have metadata about each of the products. And what we want to do is pass a thumbnail from that products table down to a child table so that we can get it on a rental form for our customers so that they can see the equipment on their order form or their contract there. Secondly, we are having an issue with fulfillment time. And so they want us to help them solve for reducing the fulfillment waiting time. So we're going to use a couple of formulas where we can eventually get how long it's been or the duration it's been that a contract is stuck in the waiting to fulfill status. And that way, since we have that duration, we'll be able to throw that into a report, potentially a dashboard, and then management can take some actions to help get that time reduced. Right now, they just have no insight into how long they're actually taking. They're just getting feedback from customers that it's taking too long. Third, we'll want to extract employee data for contest between locations, and that's where that summarized list user field will come about. And then lastly, we have folks around the different locations being promoted. And right now, managers are having to go in there and manually change their role in the app. There's already some workflow involved for when an employee is promoted. And so they want us to go ahead and kind of add this automation to that process. So we're going to focus on that. With that being said, since this is an advanced formulas class, we're going to just jump right into the workshop and start to work through the first two exercises here together. What I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen. So what you'll want to do if the Empower platform doesn't do it automatically for you is to go ahead and toggle over to my shared screen. That see Quickbase more so than the slides, since we're basically done with the slides for this session. And if you need us to zoom in any more in Quickbase, please just throw it in the chat and we can do that. Let me go ahead and just grab this app. And before we jump into the actual exercises, we'll take just a quick little kind of bird's eye view of the app here. And let me see, what am I at here? 150? Okay. So this is a little bit of a mixture of an app. We've got some CRM elements, a customer relationship management app, some elements of that, right? We've got our customers, contracts, products, and items. And then on the flip side, there's some kind of employee management here as well, as we've talked about employees, their positions, and then the different roles in the app. So this is kind of a multi-function app here. I'll be focusing on the customers, contracts, products, and items. And then as Eric walks you through the second two examples, he'll focus more on those other tables. So what we can do from the app dashboard here is go ahead and click on the example 1 button, and that's going to redirect us to our products table. Then what we can see here is we have a number of products, their price, the manufacturer, how many items or how many contracts that they're a part of, and then an image, because with all of these products, we want to have an image. And so we'll go ahead and click into this Goalrilla product here. So we'll just jump into the record. And we can see that we have the image here. And what we can't do is we can't just look up this image to a child table. What we need to do is create a formula field that creates the path to the image. And then because it'll be a text field, we can go ahead and pass that as a lookup to the child. So the first thing we'll want to do is from this record is go ahead and just right click on the file attachment URL path label and click the bottom option to go into the field properties. And you'll notice this in all of the formula fields that we work with. We have added the finished formula. Oh, that's cool. Let me close this. We've added the finished formula in here. So if you're just having issues creating it from scratch, you can always kind of just copy paste this, or if you have to step away, it'll be in the app for you. What we're going to do is just click on the first row here and click enter a couple times so that we get a couple of fresh lines that we can start this formula in. And I mentioned this was a formula text field. I apologize. It's a formula URL field. Either way, we're able to look up this as we're not able to look up the actual file attachment field. So that's why we're creating this. And basically what we're going to do is this is a finished formula. We're just going to write it from scratch. And as we go through each kind of component of the formula, I'll explain what it does. So the first thing we're going to do is URL root. And again, let me know if you want me to zoom in more. I know that the formula box is a little small sometimes, so just throw that in the chat. URL root is a function. As you can tell, it's got this kind of purplish color to it, and it's got the opening and closing parentheses, just like an if function. It's no different. What this does is it grabs the URL of your Quickbase account or domain. So mine is danielcallahan.quickbase.com. If you're in a builder account, it may be builder account -4931.quickbase.com. If you're in a corporate account, it may be your company's name.quickbase.com. So this URL root function grabs this whole string up here. And this is nice because A, you don't have to type it in manually, and B, if your account URL changes, this will dynamically update as well. So this little URL root is a handy little function here. Next, what we want to do is type in an ampersand, which is we're just telling Quickbase, hey, we want to go ahead and string some stuff together here. So we're saying give us your URL root and then give us what's next, which is going to be, oops, let me move my cursor out of the way, quote up / closing quote. And what this is doing is it's basically accessing the directory where the file attachment is stored. So you'll notice in our URL after our root here, it says DB, which is database. So that's kind of staying inside of Quickbase and inside of our app, where up is going, we're telling this to go fetch something. And as we finish this formula, we're going to tell it to go fetch that file attachment URL. Then what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and add another ampersand as we're going to string more together. And we're going to type in dbid. And you'll notice that that's a function as well. And what that does is it grabs the ID of this table here. So again, if you copy a formula, and you use this, you won't need to manually put in the DB ID of the table that you're maybe copying that to if you're using it in a different table. So this is dynamic as well. Then we're going to want another ampersand here as we're continuing to string along text here or functions here to create a formula. And then we want a quote, an open quote, /A/R. And Eric, if you wouldn't mind jumping off mute and clearly explaining this, as sometimes I don't do a great job of it.
Sure. So for anyone following along here, you can actually use the resource links down at the bottom. So the last one, what is currently in line number 8, is the actual path that we're building out. That's the structure that Quickbase uses, the file path architecture on the file attachment server in order to get to a certain document. So the A, I've also seen it as a G. The documentation specifically calls out an A. That's just a GET request to go and grab what the file attachment is. And then the R, as you can see on line 8, is which record ID we're targeting. If you want to read more about it, the URL that's there on line 7 has all of this detail, though, that you can read through.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And the R makes sense there because the next piece that we're going to string into this formula is the record ID number of this specific record. So we want to grab this record's thumbnail. And what we can do if we don't want to type in record IDs, we can just grab it down in here. So there's no typos or anything. Oops. That will work as well. We're going to continue along here and string just a couple more pieces. So we're going to open this with a quote. Quickbase matches it with a closing quote, so everything will just type inside of here. We'll do another /, and then E9 is actually the field ID of the file attachment field. So if I open my field list in another tab, and I look at my fields, I can see field ID 9 is the file attachment field. And so that's why we're designating the 9 here, so that the formula knows what field to go grab that, that file attachment from. And Francesco's saying in the chat control space, is my mind going to be blown here? Oh, that is super cool. It brings up different fields and functions, or, oh, that's awesome. I did not know that. That's cool. And then what we'll do here is add another /, and we're going to do V, which is short for version. And we're going to do 0, as 0 is the first version of this image. So if we wanted to kind of point to a different version of an image, as you know, with file attachments, you can kind of have different versions of the image saved, or historically over time, we could point to version 3 of it. But we know with our images here is the first one updated. We want to go ahead and point to that. We'll close this out with a /. And then the last piece we need to go ahead and grab, and can I do control space here? Yes, that is so cool. We want to grab the image field here. Let me go ahead and close out of my last tab that I had open. Oh, and Mark is saying V0 is the current version. Oh, that's possible. Eric, can you confirm that?
Yeah, it's whatever the latest uploaded version is. So if there's any revision, this is just grabbing the most recently updated one.
Awesome. My apologies. So V1, I guess, would be the first one, and then V0 is just the most recent one. So thank you, Mark, for clarifying that. And yeah, I'm still in wow over this control space thing. So at this point, we can see we don't have any errors. There's no, well, we may have errors, but we've just structured it correctly. But there's no yellow highlights, so Quickbase isn't saying, hey, this is an incorrect, kind of syntax or anything like that. So let's go ahead and click Save in the upper right. And let me go ahead and paste this in the chat. I know that you all have the finished formula there, but just to have it. And now we can see this value used to be blank, and now that we've defined the formula, we have a value in here. And if we click on that, we'll see that the image loads up. So we can confirm that we've correctly completed this formula. We now have a thumbnail, or we now have the actual image. What we'll want to do now is jump into our settings here so that we can go into the relationship between products and its child table items. So we'll jump in there. And then we'll go ahead and add this new formula field as a lookup, because that's what we're going to reference to create the thumbnail. And so we'll want to grab file attachment URL path. And once you have that, go ahead and hit create in the upper right. And then we'll go ahead and click exit. And now what we'll want to do is we already have an item child record here. So instead of fishing through the items table, we can just click the view icon here to jump right into this specific item. And we'll jump into this formula by, again, right-clicking on the label and clicking the bottom option field properties, a little shortcut to get there. And again, so here we have a finished formula, but we're going to go ahead and write it from scratch. And this is a formula rich text. And so what we can do inside of a rich text field is throw in some HTML tags. And we're going to start off with an IMG or image tag. Oops. Let me throw in an opening caret there. So it should look like quote, open caret, IMG. And there's a closing quote that I'm going to go ahead and delete for now. I'm going to add it back at the end, but you can see we have a little bit to type out here. Now, what we're doing with this next tag here is defining the height of the thumbnail. And what this does is it will properly scale the thumbnail, the height and width of the thumbnail, so that we don't get anything scrunched or too stretched out. So if we were to define the height and the width, depending on how we define it, it may stretch or scrunch the image. But if we only do height, it's going to automatically kind of scale that or keep it at a good ratio for us. So what we want to do is height equals, and then a backslash. And here we're defining in pixels how big we want this thumbnail to be. So if we finish this and 250 is too small, we can come back in here, maybe do 500 and see where that leads us. Oh, do I need to go back? Let me know if I need to go back. Let's see.
Keep going, Daniel. Someone just closed out the window, so they're trying to get caught up. So go ahead.
Okay. You want me to go back or just keep going here?
Keep going. I was just giving some context on where we're at. Okay,
great. And then we'll want to do PX for pixel. If we come in here and change it to 500 and that's too big, then we can, continue to kind of shrink it or increase it depending on what we're looking for. After the pixel, we'll go ahead and do a backslash. And we're going to keep this quote here, as that's nesting the height inside of this open and closing quote. And then we're going to do SRC, which is the source. And basically what we now need to say is we've opened an image tag. We've told it how high and wide we want it to be. And now we need to give it a source for the image. Otherwise, nothing is going to appear. And so we'll do SRC for source. We'll do an equal sign, just like we did with height, as well as a backslash. We'll throw in a couple quotes, one to go ahead and close out of the source, and then another so that we can go ahead and add an ampersand here. Or actually, I think what we're doing there is closing the, we're closing the image, the quote around the image there at the beginning. Now what we can do is throw in an ampersand here to grab this field, and we'll do control space and we'll grab the lookup field we just created earlier, which is product-file attachment URL path. So go ahead and grab that. And because we're going to be closing the image tag, we're going to go ahead and throw another ampersand here to string that after grabbing the field marker. And then we're going to do quote, backslash, got the matching quote, and then we're going to do a / close the image tag, and then a final quote. And Quickbase will add 2, so go ahead and delete that very last one. There should only be 1 quote at the end. And what that's doing is closing out everything here. So let me go ahead and paste that in the chat, and then we'll hang tight here for just a second. For folks who have the formula all set, you can go ahead and click Save. And then what you'll see, and I'll go ahead and join you at this point, looks like the chat's okay. What you'll see is now an image thumbnail of the parent record. So if I jump back in here and say, you know, this thumbnail is too big if we're going to be sending it out, maybe I just want 150. Maybe a little small, we want 200, but you get the idea there. Now we have this thumbnail on the child table, we can go ahead and use this for reports, or if we're going to add this field in an embedded report for another parent table, like the contracts table, or if we want to send this out outside of Quickbase, we can do that from this table now. So if I look at if we click on the contract date from this item, it's going to bring us up to that parent contract. And when we look down in the embedded report, we can see the thumbnail. And I think this might actually be from the products table. Let me see if I can, oh no, that's the items table. We just kind of mislabeled the section heading here, but all 4 of these items are part of this contract. So we've got a customer renting out these 4 items, and now we can see we have an image thumbnail here. Without that whole process, we wouldn't be able to kind of show folks or have any visual on what we're renting out. So let's go ahead and head back to the app homepage. And we'll go ahead and click on the example 2 button here. And that's going to jump us into the contracts table, and that's where we'll be focusing on for this specific example. So we've got a number of contracts here. They've got some data, when they were started, what their status is. And then over here on the very right, we've got this status history field. And if we go into the properties of that by clicking the little 3-dot menu here, we can go to the field properties, and we'll see that this field has logged entries checked. So I mentioned earlier in the learning goals that you can log entries. So basically, this is a text multi-line field. This is the only field that allows you to log entries. And basically what happens is when a value is changed in a field, you can, or in this field, you can go ahead and log that. Or you can use this in conjunction with dynamic form rules, like we are with the status. And when the status is changing, we're using a form rule to push that status into this status history field. So over the course of a contract, we're able to see when, so you can see the date here, and who, the name of the individual who changed the status. So that way, at the end of a contract, we can see who changed it from new to waiting for fulfillment, and then who changed it from fulfilled to items returned, or whatever our kind of closing status is. That allows us to see how long, or that allows us to see kind of the different statuses, when they change and who did them. So you can check and uncheck these as much as you'd like, but this is how you log entries in Quickbase. So let me go ahead and exit settings here. And we'll go ahead and jump into this bottom record. And as we look at this record, we've got a couple of entries that were logged. So on May 4th, I changed this status to waiting fulfillment. And then a couple of days later, I changed it to fulfilled. What we want to do is we want to provide management with a duration of how long it's been, or how long this contract has been in this status for. So we've got a couple of formulas to fill out, and we can see the 4 fields here. We've got a date, a time of day, a combination field of date, time, and then a duration. So we'll go left to right. We'll go ahead and jump into the date field here. So go ahead and right click and jump into the properties. We can see the finished formula again, and we'll go ahead and give ourselves some space here. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to have the record in one screen, and then I'm going to have the formula in another, and I'll split screen here so that you can see both at the same time. Let's see here. Okay. Oops. And we're gonna start with this formula by writing it inside out. And so if we look at the finished one here, we can see we are starting with the status history, because what we're trying to do is extract a specific value, in our case, the date, from this status history field on the left. So we'll do control space and we'll grab status history. I wonder if you can type the letter. Oh, that's so cool. Status history. And then we're going to start with the right function. And what we want to do is we want to grab everything to the right of \n, which is HTML for a new line. And so if we look at this record, what we're doing is there's a return or a new line between these statuses, and we want to grab everything after this new line. So basically what we're doing is grabbing this line because we only want the most recent logged entry. So that's what the right does, everything after this, this new line. So we've isolated this line, and now what we want to do is slowly kind of inch our way into grabbing the date. So the next thing we're going to do is use the left function. And then we want to head over here to the end of the formula. Oh, and I'm sorry, I totally forgot to close the right function. So we want to do that first. Now we can see there's matching parentheses. Then we want to do a comma so we can tell this formula what exactly we're taking to the left of. And we're going to take left of the first space. And we want to go ahead and close that function. And so if we look back over here on the record, we grab this whole line. But now what we want to do is grab left of the first space. So the first space is right here in between the date and time. So what we've done is we've grabbed this left of the space. But you can see we've got this opening bracket kind of hanging on here for dear life. And what we want to do is just go ahead and take that off. So we're going to use the not left function. Again, a comma here so that we can finish this function. And we're going to do the number 1. And what this does is we're not taking the first character. So we had this parsed out. We're not taking the first character from the left, which is just the date here. So now we have May 6th, 2021. we can see that this is a formula date field. So our finishing touch here after we close this not left function is to use the toDate function so that we take that May 6th, 2021 and actually format it properly into a date. So I'll go ahead and copy paste this. And now we save this. And let me go ahead and full screen this again. And now we can see we have a date. So now we know in days, just by looking, it's been about 3 weeks, but we still haven't had Quickbase calculate this out for us via this duration. So what we could do is if we only cared about this value in number of days, is we could just skip ahead and do this duration. But we may want to get more granular, and instead of getting complete days, like 1 day, 2 day, or 1.5 days, we also may want to we want to look at the time of day so that we can take it a step deeper. So let's do that. Let's jump into this time of day field.
Daniel, one quick question that came up. Yep. Would you mind going to the form rules for this? There was a question around how does the form know to populate the log status changes?
Yep, let me jump in there right now, and then we'll jump into that that time of day formula. So if we jump into our forms and click on the dynamic form rules tab, we can see we have this form rule set up so that when the record is saved and the status has changed, take that status value and throw it into the status history field. So not only is that logged entry giving us a date, time, and the user, it's also giving us the new status that's been changed to, and then logging it in there. And I'll keep this open if there's any other questions, but we'll jump back into the formula now. Okay, so again, we've got the finished formula. Let's give ourselves a little bit of room here. And we're going to work inside out as well here. And again, we're going to start with status history, as we want to go ahead and pluck the time now and not the date. So we want to grab status history. Oops. Again, we want that same opening right function so that we grab everything after this line, the new line. So we just grab the most recent status. And then this time we're going to use a part function. So with a part function, what you do is you identify a delimiter, like a space, a colon, a hyphen, and then you tell Quickbase where kind of along those delimiters you want to grab the text from. So I'm going to put in the number 3, and then I'm going to identify the delimiter, which is just a space, and then I'm going to close this part with a closing parenthesis. Let's see if I can walk us through this part. So here again, we're grabbing right of the new line, so we're just grabbing this last one. And then if we look at the spaces here, we've got a space in between date and time. We've got a space between the time and the AM or PM, and then we've got a space between the AM and the user or my name here. What we're doing is saying this is spot 1, 2, and 3, and we're taking before the third space here. So what this line is doing in our formula is extracting AM. And we need this because if we were to just extract the time, we wouldn't know if it was AM or PM, and that would obviously change the duration of the current of how long this contract's been in the current status. Now what we can do is copy this line and give ourselves a new line above it and just paste it and change the 3 to a 2, because we know we want to grab the actual time so that we have the time and then the AM or PM designation. So now we have the time and then AM and PM. And I guess I'm kind of putting new lines in the wrong spot here, but I'll add some lines before here. We know eventually we want to make this a time of day value because it's a time of day field. And just like we did with the previous formula, we wrapped everything in a date function. So we're going to do 2 time of day. And with 2 time of day, we need to give it some values to put inside of there. And we have 2. So we're going to go ahead and list those out. And I keep deleting the closing parentheses as we're going to add them again after at the bottom of our formula. But now we want to list these 2 values out with a space. So that's going to give us the time of day, a space, and then AM or PM. And then we can go ahead and add the 2 closing parentheses for those initial functions at the bottom. And Quickbase is saying, hey, something's not right here. And it's correct. I forgot to add a comma at the end of this line. If we don't add a comma, it just doesn't really know where to go. So all in all here, we've grabbed the time of day and we've grabbed the AM or PM. We've essentially concatenated those together with the list function and used a space as a delimiter. So it's time of day and AM or PM. And then we've wrapped all of that inside a time of day to create a properly formatted time of day value so that when we save here, we now have the time that we've extracted from here. Next up is we have both of these values kind of in isolation. And what we could do if we wanted to combine them is jump into this status date time field. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up pretty quickly because we already have the date and the time. So all we need to do here is use the toTimestamp function, which is just asking us for a date. Oh, what did I do here? Oh no, it's falling short here. Okay, so I'll just grab it the old-fashioned way here and just search status date. And then after this comma, it's going to ask us for the time. And that's all you need for a toTimestamp function is a date value and a time of day value. If we didn't have those individual fields, we could use this formula down here, which is basically a combination to get this date and time value. So having these 3 fields in place allows us to have the date and time together in one field, also broken down or parsed out into individual fields in case we want to use these for notifications or reports. Then our last piece here, depending on if we want to use just the date or the time of day, is to grab the duration. This will give us the final piece we need, and then we'll know how long this contract's been stuck in that status. So let's jump into the status duration. And you'll see we're using the now function. That's because we are going to be comparing this. We're going to be using the date time field that we created. So now is a date time function. If we were just using the status date field, we would use the today function, which is just a date function. So we will do now, and then we'll grab status date time, and I'll remove today. And what this is doing is it's looking at now, as this is a dynamic function. So now is going to spit out May 26th, 12:20 Pacific time. In an hour, it'll spit out May 26th, 1:20 Pacific time. So we're just looking at now versus the value in that status date time. And that's going to give us a duration when we save this. And so now we know how long this contract has been stuck in the fulfilled status. Not too valuable here because we're not really looking for fulfilled, but if we had a contract that was stuck in waiting to be fulfilled, what we could then do is throw this into a report and probably in the filter and say, hey, show me all contracts where the status is waiting fulfillment and the current status duration is more than 1 day or whatever your metric or threshold is. And now you start to have some action items for management or the folks who are trying to kind of speed this up. That would also give you a comprehensive list of the number of contracts that are kind of outside that threshold. You could color it up at that point too, and you could even be proactive, and you could look at contracts that are nearing that threshold. So if you're trying to get fulfillment under 2 days and you've got some contracts that are stuck in waiting fulfillment and it's been 1.8 days, you may want that on a report so that folks can kind of be proactive about it. Yes, let me jump into the formula for status date, and I'll go ahead and copy paste it if you'd like. And then we've got a question about 20 days. May 4th to May 6th is 2 days. Yeah, so let me explain that really quick. What we're doing is we're looking at today, which is the 26th, minus the status date, which is the 6th. So this this contract's been fulfilled for 20 days. Oops, sorry about that. And so that's where we're getting that calculation there. Yeah, exactly. It's calculating from May 6th. Let's see, we've got a question on, and sorry if I've missed any reason capitalization did not carry to status time of day. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm assuming since we're using the function, it's just formatting it in a way that it's happy with. As some of you may know, if you use and or capitalized, that can kind of be screwy in some places. So maybe it kind of down cases it so that any weird situations like that wouldn't happen. I'll keep answering the questions as they come into the chat, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to Eric as he's going to go ahead and walk us through exercises 3 and 4. And let me just throw up on the slide really quick, just a little reminder on what those 2 exercises are. And Eric, all you.
Great. Thanks, Daniel.
Yep.
So back to the PowerPoint just for a moment so that we can set where we are for exercise 3 and exercise 4 as Daniel continues answering questions. So for these next 2 examples, we have a shift in the tables that we're looking at here. We're going to look specifically at the employees table, the positions table, some of those type of details. So the first one that we'll view is when our employees who have an email address need to see certain data as a report filter or as a role restriction. We need to bring that through over to the contracts that we've just been looking at. The last example that we'll take a look at together is using our API with a pipeline. We can actually, as data changes inside Quickbase, actually go and modify the role that certain users are marked as within the application. So let's share our screen and we can walk through those 2 together. So one resource that I would like to showcase outside of the application that we've already been working in is this right here. If you wanted to see this detail, this is a useful tool for building Quickbase formulas outside of the built-in product formula builder. So what this one does is it shows us the Quickbase formula function, which arguments or pieces of information that we need to hand to it, what it will generate as a result, and then it gives us a useful English explanation and then some syntactically correct examples. So if that's useful for you, I oftentimes still have to come and reference this when I'm wanting to convert the duration that we were just looking at to a numeric version for a number of days. Or if I'm wanting to take these text number or these numbers and convert them to a date result. There's plenty of examples inside of here. One that is particularly useful will be the part function that Daniel was just mentioning. And then we've also got a new one called a user ID that we'll look at, for example, 4 in just a moment. But you can see here, the way that Daniel was describing that is a full explanation in case you need more context. But let's dive back into the application. So from here, if we look at example number 3, where we're focused in this context is on our contracts table. We have our list user field, but in order to start that, we're going to come over here to, oh, wrong place. I wanted to look at our email field. This is currently being brought through as a lookup over to the positions. We have what's referred to as a many-to-many relationship. Hopefully that feels familiar. But each employee could be in different positions on certain contracts. So if we go and take a look at positions instead, there is this formula field that we have to take our first action in within this example. So if we go to this formula, just like Daniel was doing, we've already got the example inside of here. The reason that this is necessary is on the employee table, the data type is email address, and we actually need this to be a text type for a certain summary field to work properly. So just as simple as possible, all we have to do is choose our employee email. And with that in place, it now showcases the email address if we have an employee selected for these various positions. With that now available, if we take a look specifically at the relationship between our contracts and positions, Quickbase has a summary field option. I'll show you the setup just in case you've not seen this before. When we choose to add a summary field, we can pick a summary of a specific field. We can count the number of child records. And then this is one that we just added in last month's release, where you can just see if there are child records of a certain type or not, or status or not, or date time frame or not. This one would generate a true or false instead of counting the number of child records that the top one might. But for our purpose, we need to do a summary of a specific field and pick this combined text. So this right here, if we tried doing this with the employee email, it would actually generate an error message when we try to save this. So instead, we would have to do it as the new text formula. Slightly silly, but that's what we have to do in order to set up the next step. So from here, we've already got our combined text summary field. And at this point, let's go back over to our contracts table where you would have landed if you clicked the example 3 button from the dashboard. From here, there are 2 formulas that we're going to work through. And in this context, the first one that we want is this combined text employee email text formula. So this is that summary field that we were just looking at. And, oh, I hadn't refreshed it. So now that we refresh this, we can see that for this contract, we have our 3 email addresses for the employees that we've selected on this one. The actual formula that we need to build is here in the employee list user. Let's open this as a new tab similar to what Daniel just did. And
hey, Eric, we've got a couple folks in the chat saying a little too fast.
Okay. I'm just wanting to give us enough time for the Q&A. So let's go back through those details, though. So from here, we had our employees, which have the email address. That is brought through as a lookup field to the positions table. So when we move over to positions for the moment, we have extra to our formula. This is the lookup field version. If we view this, this is a email address type. And for the summary field, sorry, the summary field requires it to be a text field, so we had to convert it just by simply having a formula text here on positions, and it's literally just duplicating what that lookup field is. So hopefully you can follow along with that. And then finally, within the relationship between contracts and our positions, that's where we've done that summary field of that employee email text formula that we've just set up. So essentially, employees have a lookup field of their email address to positions. We convert that from an email type to a text type so that then we can bring up the combined text of all of the folks' email addresses that are on a certain contract to the contract level. So feel free to ask any questions if you need further details there. What I'd like to do is similar to Daniel. Let's make this window off to the right, this window off to the left, and that way we can compare the two of them together. So now, with this one in mind, let's take a look at the employee list user formula. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I wanted to keep this one on this window so that we can see the three examples that are right here. So our formula that's already here inside our result is what you can reference, but building from the inside out, we're going to take that combined text employee text formula field, so basically all three of these email addresses. This is, you can see in the error message, it's popping up as a type called text list. So we have to first convert this to be a text type by wrapping it in a toText function. The next thing is that part formula that Daniel showed us a few minutes ago. So that is the first argument is a text piece of information that we're looking at. We give it the section that we want to extract from there. So we're going to look at the first portion. And when we convert this, if we had done this just as a formula text result and did the toText, Quickbase actually puts a semicolon in between each of these entries. So here, we're going to separate it by the semicolon and grab the first portion. So in this context, it would get this Colleen Garton's email address as a text result itself. Finally, since we want to do this as a user type, we're going to wrap this entire portion in a toUser function. And still an error message because we're expecting a user list, and right now we only have it as a user type. So the last formula that we're going to use, if we come down to the choose fields and functions, and we pick select a function, there is a toUser list. So here's the other one that I often use. is this one. We can have an entire list of user types, where the example down here, we might have a sales manager user field, a business manager user field, and that will combine those together as a list user type. So at this point, if we wrap this entire thing in a to-user list formula, oops, this one, no error message, and all we've done is extract the first portion. So let's take a look at that result. Oh, took us all the way back to the dashboard. So right now for this, we can see that our calling Garten is a user result based off of what email address we had over here. If we've done the first line correctly, we can now easily make this into a version. Let's make this a little larger. And for this purpose, we're going to do 3 lines so that we can extract all 3 portions. So if we highlight this one and just enter it multiple times, we'll do all 3 of these. Now all we have to do is change this to be the second portion and this to be the third portion. So let me paste just this small piece into our chat in case that's useful. And from here, if we now look at the result, we'll come back and look at the full formula example in just a moment. But showing you the results, we've essentially converted these email addresses to their equivalent user types. And this now means that we can have them as a report filter. We can do it as a role restriction. We can do it in a report grouping if we wanted. But the list user type gives us a few additional options that we couldn't just do with email addresses or have to manually go and choose the people in that context. So let me paste the full formula and see if there are any questions. Daniel, any that we need to address at this point?
No, just a couple questions kind of floating around about the semicolon, and then the formula you posted. It's basically just covering for 3 entries, but you could build that out to cover for the max 20 for that field, right?
Yes, so that's a good point. The list user type and the combined text type can only have a maximum list of entries of 20. So to Daniel's point, if we had this line multiple times, and we do this one as the third portion, and this one as the fourth portion, and this one as the 5th, 6th, so on and so forth, we could place this up to 20 if we wanted. And the nice thing is that it will ignore anything that doesn't have a value. So even though we did 7 of them here, it still only has our 3 results because that's the only set of text email addresses that we were able to extract from. Was there another one, Daniel? I'm trying to remember.
No, just similar questions around that, basically asking, what does this only cover for 3, or what if I want to kind of dynamically cover for whatever quantity is in that field? And I just kind of said, you may as well just build it all the way out to have the 20 lines, so that if there's one entry in there or 20, you're all squared away. And then if there's more than 20, you would have to kind of, duplicate this process, and then maybe split it like, 1 through 20 and 21 through 40, or A through L and M through Z, whatever makes sense to the use case.
Yep. So if, for example, we added in 5 folks, so here we have 5 email addresses, we can see over here that all 5 have been brought through to our list user field. So it doesn't matter how many of these we put in, as long as we expand the formula up to the full 20. I stopped at 7 here just for the sake of the example, but hopefully that demonstrates how dynamic this could be. Okay. And for the last couple of minutes, I wanted to show one more example where if we go back to the dashboard, take a look at example 4, we're using a new formula function called user to ID. It was just added in the last couple of months, but what we need to hand it is a user type. It will generate a text result of this example over here, where if we look at the record owner, the person who created the record, it will give us some kind of number. Usually they're about 7 digits. This was one of the earliest ones. And then it will have a period and 4 letters or numbers after that. That is required if we go take a look at our API documentation. Now, if you've done any work with our API, most of the time, our recommendation right now is to use this developer.quickbase.com. It uses JSON as its data structure, a lot easier to work with and more responsive. Not to say that the older one is bad, but this is where a lot of our focus for development is going. One thing that we haven't built yet inside the new API are a few specific calls. So from this documentation, if you go to the Quickbase API call reference and scroll down to this API change user role is the one that we will use today. This requires a few pieces of information. So user ID is the detail that we've just talked about from this formula example. So we'll go look at that on the employees table in a moment, but it is required. So that's why we have to first extract that piece of information. The role ID and the new role ID itself is a required piece. This API call will fail if you don't include that. This next one isn't necessarily required, but it says in here that if it's not supplied or left blank, then you're basically choosing to set the user's role to none, meaning they have no access anymore. So for our example, we're going to include user ID, role ID, and new role ID. The other thing that is specifically required if it's turned on for your application is a user token, which essentially is saying act as me. The user token that I've set up is one that myself, Eric, have created. If you need additional details, you can read through those documentation points, or we can showcase how to do that if we want to circle back there. And then I'm going to use this URL equivalent, which we can see the pattern right here is doing our target domain. So in our context, I'm doing it inside the Quickbase company account. We have to point it to a specific table ID. We're using the change user role action. Instead of a ticket and an app token, I'm combining those two together for a user token. And then we have the user ID and the role ID and the new role ID. So hopefully that will look familiar when we go view the pipeline detail in just a moment. Let's update our formula. So back inside the Quickbase application, if you've clicked example 4, you should have landed here on the employees table. And if we view this field's properties, this one is using that new formula field, user to ID. And similar to what we just did with our last example, we have to convert the email address to a user type because over here in the documentation, this does require a user argument. So we're going to put into user and then whatever the email address is for that employee record. So looking at this result, we can see that some of these example records that my coworker created many years ago has really small user numbers, But for some of the ones that have been created, if you do this for some of your users, they're going to end up being more like these numbers. And then the details after the period, I'm not sure exactly where those are determined from, but this is what Quickbase uses internally in order to identify this user, each individual user in that context. So finally, just to walk through the details, let's post that formula in the chat in case you'd like that handy. Okay, so last thing I wanted to walk through was an example pipeline of how we could possibly use this. So by way of explanation, we need to take a look at the roles and the actual roles table. So the roles that we have inside this application are administrator, assistant specialist, outdoor specialist, and manager. As I mouse over these, it might be a little small on the screen share, so you can do the same thing yourself. But if you look down at the bottom of the screen, or if we click into one of these, you can see it up here in the URL. It has a certain role ID. And all I've done is placed those into a certain roles table so that we have a data point to pull from through the pipeline itself. So just remember, assistant specialist is 13, outdoor specialist is 14. We'll go look at an example of this in a moment. And what the pipeline is doing is we have a Quickbase record being updated specifically on our employees table. We're triggering it off of the title field changing, and then I need to use title, email, and user to ID in my subsequent steps. So pause there for a minute just so you can look at that piece of information. Hopefully you've done some pipeline work already and this looks familiar. The next steps that we're going to do, though, are two searches so that we can first search the roles table, and specifically using the role ID, a limit of 1 so that we're only returning 1 result. And here's a small thing that we've just added to Quickbase, I think 2 months ago, where if our search filter at the bottom of this search is that the role name itself equals, if we drag through this title over here, you can hopefully see the text that it would place in there. It's this A period title. We now have this ability to put in a $ previous, and this is going to say what did the title change from, and then match that against the role name so that now we can extract what the role ID is from that role record that we just searched for. For each of those that we found, we're going to do a subsequent search, similar to what we just did, where again, we're searching the roles table, same 2 fields for subsequent steps. We still have a limit of 1. And then the role name this time needs to equal whatever the title was changed to. So now we've been able to return which role ID they changed from, which role ID they changed to. And then finally, within the for each after that, we are using, Quickbase has a webhook channel. Make it a little smaller. So this webhook channel has a request that we can make, and I've placed that over here. And essentially, I've told it to do a, oh, I needed to have this as a get method. The execution would have run the same. You can still do it as a post method if you look from the API documentation, see what the header looks like in the body. But here we're going to do this as a get method. And just like we saw in the API documentation, I'm calling the account URL that we're a part of, We're pointing this at the application ID that we're involved with. The action is change user role. The user token is my example one that I've only set up to work with this test application. And then we have to include the user ID, which was this from the step A, the role ID, which is from that first search, meaning what role someone changed from, and the new role is what they were changed to. So let me paste this in here, and I'm going to remove that's fine. Even if you have the user token, you can only access this test application, so it doesn't matter. Let's look at what happens as a result, though. So back over here, at the moment, when we look at our user list, Albert Cruz, for example, is in the assistant specialist role. And if we change his record here, oh, we need to go turn our pipeline on. We will be able to change Albert Cruz from assistant specialist to outdoor specialist. And when we save this, the pipeline starts running. We see our record was updated. We found which role they changed from. We found which role they changed to. And then we run the API call down here at the bottom of step D. And so at this point, if we refresh this page, we can see that Albert Cruz's role automatically changed to outdoor specialist. So I believe that's what we wanted to demonstrate today. Daniel, any additional questions regarding those details?
There's been a few questions about the pipeline itself. If you could jump back into step A, just to have that on the screen. And then there's a bunch of folks kind of asking, like, hey, how do I access this pipeline? Not possible because it's Eric's pipeline, but the best we can do is find a way to export the YAML for this and then get that out to all of you so that you can then import the YAML into your own pipeline and that one kind of complete it. Yeah, so I think the best we can do right now is just hang tight on this screen or screenshot of the pipeline so people can kind of take a look at it. Okay. And then we'll work on the YAML. We'll try and get that out to everyone as well.
All right. Any other questions while this is up?
Not seeing anything. Oh, looks like there's some coming in now. Eric, do you see that one from Francesco? He's asking how come a get instead of a post for the webhook?
So you can do either method. Back to the API documentation. If you wanted to do a post, it would just follow this pattern, and this would be the body. The URL alternative is just a little simpler. If you wanted to do the post method, perfectly valid though.
And then let's see, a question from Marissa. Oh, can you scroll to the next step? So possibly we've been on I think you're on the trigger right now. Yeah, let's head into the next step.
Yep.
Terry's asking, why do the pipeline instead of updating the user on the users table? It's just so that everything's automated rather than, in a small app like this, it might make sense just to do it manually. But if you have an app with hundreds or potentially thousands of users and you have a lot of folks switching between roles or whatever dictates them changing roles, it's just kind of easier to automate that so that there's no manual need for it.
Yep. And this is also an example that we put together to use the user to ID function. And this would only be useful in a role change kind of scenario. So that's what we decided to demonstrate here today.
And Philip has an awesome question / suggestion saying with the formula lookup for the thumbnail, can you do it with a sound? They want to add some sound to their project management app, it looks like, including a Mario power-up when all tasks have been completed.
I don't know of any way to play media files. We did just recently add to formula-rich text fields the ability to do pop-ups or to do iframe type capabilities if you needed to embed something else inside this formula-rich text field. But I don't know of a way to specifically play media files. I have done it to embed a YouTube video, so something like that could be useful. I believe that we're working on a blog article to provide more detail about that, so hopefully that should be published soon. But you can go and read through the, I think, last 2 months worth of release notes if you want details about the pop-up and iframe capabilities.
I think I got that pop-up as I entered into our app too.
Yep.
Someone's asking about PDFs instead of an image. I'm guessing it might just show you the first
we decided to demonstrate the image of this here. That same iframe for displaying your PDF inside a formula-rich text field is the route that I would go there. We were doing it with HTML and an image tag, but for a PDF, you would need to do that iframe capability.
And then you can go ahead and scroll down to the next step.
Okay.
In the pipeline.
Yeah. Step C is basically the same as step B. The only difference is that we didn't do the previous. It's literally all the same stuff. And then so probably the one that you would be more interested in seeing at this point is this GET request that I had just pasted here.
And at this point, we are done with the exercises, so we've kind of smoothly transitioned into the Q&A. Typically, this session will end in 3 minutes, but I think we have like a hard boot at 10 after, so we're both happy to answer more questions for basically as long as until we get kicked out. So feel free to keep throwing those in the chat or the Q&A. I love Lee there with the memes and combining that in pipelines. There's a Slack channel as well. So yeah, now we're thinking even outside of Quickbase, let's use Quickbase as the repository of GIFs and then Slack people. I feel like GIFs are great for admins, or pop-up GIFs would be great for admins, but maybe a nuisance for some of the app users or end users out there. Eric, if you can focus on the chat, I'm going to start answering some questions in the Q&A.
Okay. The control space is a fairly new thing. I haven't seen that before. Francesco, if you're still there, if you want to share what you learned about it, and if there's any nuances that you know.
Francesco is officially a co-host of this session at this point because that was so game changing. Oh, we do have a question asking if a user has multiple roles, will this functionality work or this kind of workflow work?
Sure. So that's why you have to target which role they're changing from and what you want that specific entry to be changed to. So your mileage may vary. I haven't gone and tested it to see if they're in multiple roles, what happens, or if they're listed in more than one, because you can invite a user to the application more than once. I have seen people place them in the same role.
And then kind of in the similar vein to that, we've got a question about individual role permissions override group permissions. So what takes precedence when there are multiple groups given roles in place? I'm assuming it's just the hierarchy of the roles at that point.
Yeah, so a group itself, we do have API calls to interface with the group order of things. You need the group ID. You need to change them there. So you can invite people if they're a part of a group to an application. You can also invite them individually. So what we demonstrated here today was just a way to target the individual user and switching their role, but you could do something similar if you needed to change or update or remove a group's access.
And do you see the most recent question in the Q&A?
Yeah, for some reason it stopped at question 8 for me, and it's not doing anything more. So, no. What's the question?
How convenient. The question is, we use automated groups based on an SAP data for provisioning, but the search in Quickbase doesn't show users' apps. They have the group that they've been given access to has, so they had to kind of build their own app. So that's causing tons more step runs and API calls. I thought there was an API call for getting the apps that a group has access to.
There are some for groups, and I don't know if they've been added to the new API yet, but there is one for, trying to find it really quick.
Yeah, me too. I know I've used a group.
Yeah, granted DBs for group is what you could call to see all of the applications that a certain group has access to.
Another question coming in, is there a way to automate inviting a new user to an app by adding a record containing their email and role you want to assign them to?
Yep. So I did something similar with a customer last summer where they were doing that exactly that. There is a different API call for provision user if they've never been a user inside Quickbase before. I was doing that just seeing if the to-user version of their email address existed or not, meaning if it wasn't populated, they weren't a user in Quickbase yet. So I then wanted to call the provision user to actually create them as a user profile. If not, the one is, I think, add user to role, if I remember right. Yep. So you could call that one if they're not a user inside the application currently. And that add user to role, I believe, does, I'm looking at the documentation right now, does require the user ID. So this formula that we just demonstrated today would be useful for that process.
We've got, I think, 7 more minutes before we get booted, so keep those questions coming.
And if not, we can end here. There's plenty of options for finding out additional details. So, okay, why don't we go ahead and end it there, Daniel? I think we've answered a lot of questions, but feel free to follow up if you have anything else. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for attending, and hope to see you in my session tomorrow with formulas and custom data rules. If not, enjoy the other session that you end up going to, and have a great rest of your Empower out there.